Hey, what's up, YouTube fans? What I'm gonna be saying about here is really more so philosophical than scientific per se, because it's not really some of it involves things that are not testable, um, like experimentally, right? But what I wanted to talk about in this video, right, is how when it comes to the origin of life, right, really all statistical improbabilities, right, in regards to the origin of life, right, are not problematic to explain, depending on the model of the cosmos that one favors, right? There's really a easy solution to really all statistical improbabilities. So like, why is it that it, is just the right way, out of so many differing options, and, the right things at the right, happening at the right time, all at once, you know, regardless of how, big the number is, of how improbable, it could be 1 in 10 to the power of a trillion, to the power of another trillion, to the power of another trillion, or, way lower probability than that. It really doesn't matter what the number is, right? Because so long as there are enough universes, right, then really any improbable event, right, can be expected to occur somewhere, right? And now generally that would not be a good explanation for something, because generally, even if there's enough universes for something to occur, you wouldn't expect to happen yourself to, just by chance, be like at the spot where it did occur, right? Even if there's enough universes for it to happen somewhere, right? But see, in this instance, you would expect for yourself to be there, right? Because if life didn't come to exist, we wouldn't be here, right? Um, our brain and sensory organs never would have come to exist. There would be nothing conscious on planet Earth, most likely, right? And most likely anywhere where there is no life, there's nothing conscious, there's nothing there to determine whether or not there's life there. It's just mindless, unconscious things, right? And so, while generally, if something is like highly improbable to happen, it wouldn't be a good explanation to say like, oh well, if there's enough universes, it probably happened somewhere. Because while that would be true, you wouldn't expect to yourself happen to be where it happened, right? But in this case, you would, right? You would expect to find so long as it happens somewhere, you would expect to find yourself there, right? And so really, all statistical improbabilities are non-problematic, right? Both, in terms of like the specific events that happen to occur on the things that had to occur on early Earth, as well as the constants of our universe, right? The specific laws of our universe, right, which could differ in other universes, right? And so And like really it doesn't matter how big the number is, right? Like it could be like any crazy number that would take it like nearly an eternity to write. I mean, no number, most numbers wouldn't well, I shouldn't say no number, but like it could be 1 in 10 to the trillion, to the power of another trillion, to the power of another trillion, to the power of another trillion, or it really doesn't matter, um because so long as there are enough universes and enough varying constants of universes, then we can expect any improbable event to happen somewhere, right? And in this particular instance, we would expect ourselves then to we would expect to find ourselves where it did happen, right? We wouldn't so like no matter how low the like no matter how rare it is, right? um Anywhere where it doesn't happen, right, we wouldn't expect to be there, right? We would expect to find ourselves, right, where it did happen, right? And so now some of this goes beyond the scope of what science can test, right? um like because like in terms of like invoking many universes, right? But that really is not problematic in my view, so long as it's holds up logically, right? um and so and in our universe alone, right, it's estimated that there could be as much as 1 trillion stars, right? And so especially when you talk about like certain things like specific to planet Earth in particular that had to occur in the right way, there's possibly as much as trillions of stars, the one that we revolve around being only one of them, right? And so each of these individual stars could be looked at like as an individual experiment done unintentionally by nature, that like, oh, this one randomly does this and this one randomly does that. The more you have, the more variations of differing possibilities you will get. And so it is true that the more options there are for something to occur, the higher probability, the more opportunities there are for something to occur, the higher probability of it occurring, right? So, like with, for example, if you were to flip a coin 1 trillion times, it would be incredibly unlikely that it would happen by chance to every time land on heads. The chances will be 1 in 2 to the power of 1 trillion. But if you were to do that same experiment 2 to the power of 1 trillion times, then you would actually expect that at least one of the times, most likely, it would happen to land on heads every time, right? And if you were to do that experiment 4 to the power of 1 trillion times, by that point you would it would actually be by that point it would actually be highly unlikely that you wouldn't have many times over where it happens to land on heads every time. um And so what's like the key thing to also recognize is that this also doesn't involve any coincidence having to occur, right, in the broad scheme of things, right? Because in the broad scheme of things, right, there will be no more bias towards what happened on Earth, towards any other arrangement of things, right? And it would not have to be coincidental that we find ourselves here, right? Because anywhere else we would not expect to find ourselves, right? And so, in the broad scheme of things, there would actually be no coincidence required, right? And a lot of people, when someone brings up things like this, will be like real, like grumble, and like, oh, really? But when you think about it, it really makes logical sense. I think that because it is true, right, that anywhere where where life doesn't occur, right, you wouldn't expect to find yourself there. That is actually true, right? Um, that's not just like some like that's not even just like something that I'm like making up to explain this. I mean, that actually is what's the case, that anywhere where life doesn't come to exist, you wouldn't expect to find yourself in that spot of the cosmos, right? And so therefore there's therefore what that means then, right, is that there's an observer bias, you could say, right? Because just because like it arranged in the way that it did here, right, that doesn't mean that that's what happens the vast majority of the time. And there's no coincidence required, right? Because regardless, we would expect to find ourselves where it does happen, right? Um, and so I mean, another good example of like observer bias, right? Or like it's not exactly observer bias per se, but it's a similar concept, right? Is that if you like hear the story about like various things that a serial killer did over the years, not to get too dark, but if you like hear on the TV about the various things that a serial killer did, right, then there, and like the like in terms of like their personal life and things like that, then there's pretty much a 100% chance that the serial killer was caught, right? But that doesn't mean that all serial killers that are caught, or I mean, that doesn't mean that all serial killers are caught, right? It could even be the case that most of them are not, but the ones that are not, you won't hear about their personal details because we don't know who they are. Simple as that, right? And so, I mean, that example comes to mind just because I was like watching videos about stuff like that recently with my brother, right? But so in any event, we have a observer. It is true, right? Like people will be like grumble, and like they'll be like annoyed by someone bringing this up, and like they'll think that you're like stretching the truth, right? But it really isn't like it actually makes logical sense that that there is an observer bias, right? That you only expect for there to be observers, conscious observers, where there is life, right? And so therefore the fact that we find ourselves here, right, is not at all indicative of how common life is within the grand scheme of things is not at all indicative of that, right? For that reason, right? And we really have no clue currently how vast the cosmos is. We really have no clue. It could be any amount of vastness, right? Any amount of universes potentially. And so, for that reason, really, all statistical improbabilities in regards to the origin of life are completely unproblematic to account for. All right, that's all for now. See you guys.